Hello and welcome to the CSF Author Interview Podcast. I'm Professor Peter Nash from the Griffith University in Brisbane in Queensland, and we're very fortunate today in the middle of this corona crisis to be joined by Professor Georg Schett from the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg. Welcome, Georg, and thank you very much for giving up your time in the middle of all this chaos.
Hi, Peter. It's very nice to hear you, and I'm happy to hear you and that you are doing well in this chaotic time. So I look forward to, I hope I can answer all your questions you prepared for me.
Okay, so today we'll be reviewing really the effects of JAK inhibitors on bone homeostasis. In particular, we're referring to a very interesting but quite complicated article that was published in Science Translational Medicine very recently. First author is Susan Adam from Georg's group. JAK inhibition increases bone mass in steady-state conditions and ameliorates pathological bone loss by stimulating osteoblast function. And that's really very novel for us. We're used to lots of our therapies inhibiting osteoclast function, but to actually be a stimulator of osteoblast function is really very novel. So we look forward to hearing your thoughts on that. So can you give us a bit of an idea about how you put the study together and why you did this particular study?
Yeah, so actually I think what we all know that JAK activation is important for mediating cytokine effects on immune cells. And that is actually the reason why JAK inhibitors are used in the clinics to treat inflammatory diseases very efficiently. But we felt that there are probably also some mechanisms which JAKs are doing in cells other than the immune system. And we were particularly interested in how JAKs are regulating bone homeostasis. So that was the situation. We felt that JAKs could have a different role than inflammatory cytokine in bone homeostasis. And as you know very well, this is very important for understanding rheumatic diseases.
And tell us a little bit about the two models you used, the rat model, the overectomized model, and the arthritis models that you used, because most of the audience won't be familiar with them.
So the work is actually structured in a in vitro work, basically, where we looked on the effects of cells, of JAK inhibition on cells differentiating into bone-forming cells. The second part was a modeling of bone loss. One is bone loss related to loss of estrogens, which mimics postmenopause bone loss in humans. And the other one was an inflammatory model, inflammatory bone loss in an arthritis model. And the third part of the work was a small human study where we looked at whether JAK inhibition can lead to new bone formation in arthritis patients. So referring to your questions, the two models are basically classical models to study bone loss. One said is when you take out the ovaries, you lose estrogens and you lose bone, like in humans. When you lose the function of the ovaries, you lose bone, as known as postmenopausal bone loss, which is probably the most frequent form of bone loss in humans, which is not inflammatory per se, but we know that this is a mixture of increased osteoclast and impairment of osteoblast function. So when you treat actually postmenopausal bone loss with JAK inhibitors, you can mitigate this bone loss. So it's obviously the effect of JAK inhibitors not only confined to inflammatory bone loss, but also to bone loss related to endocrine problems, if you want. And the second part is actually the arthritis model. In an arthritis model, JAK inhibition does the usual stuff like in humans. It inhibits arthritis. But on the other hand, it also inhibits bone loss very effectively, which is typically seen also in human disease based on the phase 3 trials with JAK inhibitors.
Okay, so you looked at tofacitinib, you looked at baricitinib. Is the 50 milligrams a kilo tofa and the 10 milligrams a kilo bari the kind of doses you'd ever see in a human dose with the JAK doses we use, or were they sort of supraphysiological doses?
No, these are the doses which would reflect human doses. So these were the doses which were used in the preclinical models testing of tofa and bari before they went into clinics. So these are the doses which would be equivalent to the doses in humans. Yeah. And yeah.
And were you able to pick any differences between the two JAKs, or was it either JAK really throughout the three big studies performed the same way?
I would think they perform more or less the same, where there are tiny differences, but in fact, we saw the effects with both inhibitors. I wouldn't think that there's too much difference between tofa and bari. Bottom line, what both inhibitors did is they fostered osteoblast function, which is related to bone formation. And as you mentioned in the introduction, we are usually used that interventions, immune interventions affect bone resorbing cells, which are the osteoclasts. And the osteoclasts are not so much affected actually by these inhibitors directly, but indirectly they are affected through the osteoblast. So what we found is that the main function of JAK inhibitors, both of tofa and bari, is manipulating osteoblast function, meaning that they stimulate that mesenchymal cells are differentiating osteoblasts, which improves bone formation.
And you even had histomorphometry to look at bone sections. And tell us a little bit about the histology.
Well, histology can differentiate whether a drug affects primarily bone-resorbing osteoclasts or bone-forming osteoblasts. Yeah? So there are two ways to improve bone mass. You could inhibit osteoclasts, obviously, so inhibit resorption, or you stimulate osteoblasts, which improves formation. That's a principle which is also very known in osteoporosis research, in the osteoporosis clinics. And with the histology, you can basically differentiate whether a drug primarily affects osteoblasts or osteoclasts. And what JAK inhibition is doing, it is improving bone formation, while it does not actually change very much osteoclasts. So the primarily mode of action why JAK inhibitors are protective for bone based on the histological examination is an improvement of osteoblast function, leading to more bone formation.
Super, that was very interesting, because I always assumed that IL-6, the cytokine, is quite a potent inhibitor of the rank ligand OPG pathway, even if it downregulates everything with the JAKs, but you didn't see that in these studies.
No, not too much. Actually, what we think is that in the case of an activated JAK pathway, in mesenchymal cells, you basically inhibit the differentiation into osteoblasts. Yeah, so basically you suppress bone formation, and that is actually that's actually frequently seen also in inflammatory diseases, that you have a low bone formation, so it's suppression of bone formation. And we think that JAK activation is mediating suppression of bone formation. And if you basically unleash this brake by inhibiting JAK, you basically allow more bone formation. So this happens primarily in osteoblasts, in mesenchymal cells. And it skews mesenchymal cells to an osteoblast phenotype, primarily, for instance, by increasing the expression of key osteoblast genes, which are, for instance, V and T proteins, which are activated. So basically, you allow a commitment of a resident mesenchymal cells to move into the osteoblast lineage. And that's what JAK inhibition is doing.
We spoke to Dr. Orsolini last month, and he'd done some work on the JAK-STAT pathway, in particular STAT3, and was showing a lot of effects on that Wnt pathway, in particular a reduction on the brake of osteoblast function DKK1. Did you look at any of those kinds of things?
Yeah, we make actually a sequencing of osteoblasts, which allows to check the expression of all the genes which are activated or downregulated in osteoblast. And bottom line, what you see is when you inhibit JAKs, then, and what is linked to more osteoblast differentiation, you have more V and T proteins, which are the antagonists of DKK, so they foster osteoblast differentiation, while other like other messenger RNAs and therefore also proteins like DKK are downregulated. So basically you skew the phenotype into an osteoblast phenotype, as said.
Excellent. And can you tell us a little bit about the erosions story and what effect this osteoblast formation would have on erosions and even erosion healing, and the micro-CT work that you did in this study?
Yeah, we did a very limited micro-CT work, human micro-CT work in this study, which we now expand and also want to confirm, which looks very, very good and very positive. So what we did in this study, we looked at very carefully at erosions in patients with rheumatoid arthritis by a high-resolution CT scanner, and basically reflecting basically visualizing bone erosion at the hand joints, where you basically see the erosions in high detail. And then we looked after 1 year of treatment with JAK inhibition and checked these bones again, and there was a clear evidence for repair in both of the patients, which is reflected by that you start to form a new cortical bone. So basically an erosion is a break of the cortical bone close to the joint, which you can see, and it's big enough you see in X-ray, but obviously you see it much better in a CT. And when you basically re-examine the same joint after 1 year of JAK inhibitor therapy, you see that the cortical bone is repaired, at least in part. It's not completely healed, but it's repaired. So you basically see a new cortical shell, which is formed during JAK inhibitor therapy, which reflects in a way the effect on fostering of osteoblasts, because you need, for recortication of bone, you need actually to form osteoblasts, otherwise you would not see actually new mineral deposition, because mineral deposition requires the osteoblast form bone matrix, and then you can basically deposit mineral, and then you see basically repair of an erosion.
Excellent. And when you look clinically in the X-ray studies with the JAK inhibitors across the board, the differences in the improvement from placebo or methotrexate between the TNFs and the JAKs seem to be about the same, but the TNFs must work in a very different way.
Yeah, TNFs are primarily inhibiting bone erosion, so inhibiting osteoclasts. So what a TNF, an anti-TNF antibody or a soluble receptor is doing, it inhibits the exaggerated osteoclast formation in a joint, and therefore erosions are basically arrested. So what we have shown also recently, that when you compare the effect of an anti-TNF and an anti-IL-6 receptor blocker on joints, you see basically an arrest of bone erosion in the anti-TNF, but you see some evidence of repair in anti-IL-6 receptor blocker. So the JAK inhibitor acts like a very effective IL-6 blocker as well in rheumatoid, and therefore and it's quite interesting that similar effects are seen in IL-6 blockade and in JAK inhibition, that there is evidence for repair. In the X-ray, I should say that in X-ray is not designed how we score X-rays, and also the sensitivity of X-rays, not designed to look for repair. At best, you can say that there is an arrest of a progression of X-ray erosions or joint space narrowing, but it's not designed to detect for repair. So for detection of repair, you need more sensitive measures, and this is ideally accomplished by CT.
Excellent. And the joint space narrowing, I've never been sure if that's direct pressure of pannus or pannus just releases matrix metalloproteinase and things to destroy cartilage. Any comment on joint space narrowing in your studies?
No, we didn't look at joint space narrowing in this study, but we will look at joint space narrowing in a follow-up study with more patients treated with JAK inhibitors. So we will, what you can do, you can look at joint space narrowing also in the CT, so like in the X-ray, and one will see whether there is also an effect on joint space narrowing. We know that there's an effect on joint space narrowing from the X-ray studies, but of course we would not expect that there is a regeneration of the cartilage necessarily, because this effect is more related to osteoblast differentiation rather than to cartilage repair, which is much more difficult to accomplish, obviously. As you said, cartilage repair or cartilage damage in rheumatoid is quite different from bone damage, because cartilage damage is accomplished by the generation of matrix metalloproteinases, which are enzymes degrading cartilage matrix, and they are produced mostly by synovial fibroblasts, but also by neutrophils populating the synovial fluid. So these cells contribute to matrix enzyme production and ultimately degrade the cartilage. So cartilage damage, I think, is best controlled by best control of inflammation in rheumatoid arthritis, which is obviously also the case with the JAK inhibitor. They control not only bone but also inflammation.
Superb. And do you think that even though this model is almost like a rheumatoid model, that you'll be able to pick a difference in the psoriatic arthritis patients who have bone osteoproliferation as well as erosion in the same hand, if you like? You think that proliferation and the osteoblast action will be increased in the PSA group?
Yeah, that's hard to say. We did not study that. I would think that with respect to the erosion, similar effects would be probably happening in psoriatic arthritis, because pathophysiology of erosion in RA and PSA are pretty similar. So one would think that an increase of osteoblast function would also happen with JAK inhibition in PSA, and that would lead to a partial repair of existing erosions. Whether this would have an adverse effect on the formation of enthesiophytes, we obviously don't know, but that's not a no-brainer, if you want, because at the end, enthesiophyte formation is functionally pretty different from repair of bone. So I would not automatically think that a drug which stimulates osteoblast function would also stimulate an enhanced enthesiophyte formation. So this is up to be tested. I think these data will be available in the future. And as said, I would think erosion behavior would be probably similar in PSA, and one would need to show that it does not actually worsen the enthesiophyte formation, which is obviously also important for function in PSA patients.
Right, and rheumatology is coming. Any words on the sclerostin pathway in some of your studies?
Yeah, we did not formally look at sclerostin, because sclerostin is a protein which is very specifically expressed in osteocytes, in the terminally differentiated osteoblasts. So JAK inhibition actually interferes earlier in the differentiation of mesenchymal precursors into osteoblasts. So it actually affects the expression of genes which determine that a cell becomes an osteoblast. Whereas sclerostin is much later when a cell has acquired the osteoblast status and then actually is entrapped in the bone and becomes an osteocyte, then sclerostin becomes very important. Sclerostin, as you know, is a very powerful inhibitor of bone formation. And at the moment, we don't know actually how JAKs are regulating sclerostin. This study
interesting area to look at, eh?
That it's happening much earlier in the differentiation.
Okay, well, you've got a lot of work to do because there's a lot of interest in all these different aspects of your study. Can you just give us some take-home messages for the clinician, what they should now start to think about the effect of JAK's inhibition on the JAK-STAT pathway, bone formation, bone erosion?
Yeah, I would say the study shows very nicely that JAK inhibitors are beneficial for bone. They can, by improving repair. So I think repair will become an interesting aspect of rheumatoid arthritis and probably psoriatic arthritis, that you don't consider damage as a condition which is everlasting, but you can also affect damage with partial repair. So it fosters actually the use, I think, of JAK inhibitors in diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. We also may see future data on osteoporosis. So as you know, osteoporosis is an important extra-articular manifestation of rheumatoid arthritis, and one hopes that the effect of JAK inhibitors are also improving osteoporosis in RA patients, which are known to go along with an increased fracture risk.
Super. So we thank you again very much for your time, Professor Schett, and for your very interesting paper. This has been the CSF Author Interview podcast. If you'd like to know more about this paper and others uploaded to the CSF website this month, including detailed slide sets that are available in the publication section for download, just go to cytokinesignaling.com. Please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from, and give us some feedback and let us know what you think. Thank you so much, Georg, for a very, very interesting area, and the future looks bright for trying to improve bone formation, which is going to be so helpful for erosion repair and trying to treat the osteoporosis in particularly our rheumatoid patients. Thank you very much.